I'm going to hand over to Alex. Hello, Alex, I can see you there.
Hello everybody. So I'm Alex Mayer. I'm a former member of the European Parliament for the East of England and on the Joint Policy Committee of the National Policy Forum. And I will be your host and chair until just after 11 o'clock. So the title of the session that we're about to go into is Levelling Up the Answer for Our Towns and Villages? Now, Keir Starmer told us a while ago that no party can claim to represent the country if it doesn't represent the countryside. And I think everyone on this call would agree with that. And we might add to the end of it and also represent the coast and our seaside towns. Because we all know that in villages, in hamlets, in seaside towns, in market towns, people are suffering that same cost of living crisis that they're suffering in the rest of the country. There's also an environmental crisis. There's a crisis in our NHS. There's a whole series of crises and emergencies after so many years of Conservative rule. And we need some answers and some solutions and some policies which are better than the Tories have got. I mean, all they've managed to do is have the audacity to change the name of a government department to make it into the Department of Levelling Up, but we're not actually seeing levelling up or so-called levelling up, or as I kind of think of it as redistribution of wealth, happening across our towns, cities, and also rural communities. So we have got a whole panel of people here to talk to you today, taken from lots of different tiers of government. We have got a shadow minister in Alex Norris. We've got a parish councillor, Elizabeth Marsh, town councillor, Pat Osborne, county councillor, Ruth George, and Metro Mayor, Dan Norris. And they're going to speak to you briefly in the order that I said, and then it's going to be over to you. So please do think about some questions that you've got to ask, put them in the chat, and Hugh will collate them into various themes. And if we've got time, you might have the opportunity to read them out to us as well. So it's now over to our first speaker, who is Alex Norris.
Alex, thank you, and thank you, Labour Coast and Country, for inviting me this morning. I'm Alex Norris, I'm a Member of Parliament for Nottingham North, and I'm the Shadow Levelling Up Minister. And there is something strange about, as is in the title of this session, feeling that levelling up is supposed to be the government's flagship policy, and there's almost an obligation on us as the opposition to save it. And that's because actually it's not new territory to us. Levelling up, whether it's as you characterise it, Alex, whether it's perhaps as I would put it about devolution, about regional growth, these are things that I think are of core importance to the Labour Party, to Labour members, and to a future Labour government, because actually we don't think that someone's opportunities should be predetermined at birth, because we think that young people or people more generally shouldn't have to leave their community if they don't want to in order to access good opportunities. And also because we think that everybody's got a contribution to make to the success of this country. And that's not about making points about North versus South, or London versus the rest of the country, or rural versus urban, or coastal versus places like my community. It's about saying that a reliance on one small corner of the country to deliver for the rest of us writes off millions and millions of people who've got a huge contribution to make to our success, including the communities where people are drawn from today. And that actually that's really bad for London and the southeast out of that settlement, because it means overheated public services and a lack of access to housing. And for those communities who haven't had a chance to make a contribution, they lose a lot of their young people. As I mentioned, you lose the bus services, the vibrancy of the nighttime economy. It's a settlement, a broken economic settlement that doesn't work, and we have to change that. And I think we have to centre towns and villages in that, and coastal communities as well, to find a new settlement. And I liked in the previous session the idea of a rural proofing, of seeing through that prism, that actually you can have a big national programme, but it only works if it's really granular and works for different communities in different ways. And the only way, I strongly believe this, the only way that really happens is with proper devolution and local leadership, whether that's Dan and the excellent work he's doing, or Ruth, and our towns and parishes as well. You know, we need to distribute power from what is a very centralised country out to our communities. And it's actually, for me, it's about two things. And levelling up's become very complicated, Alex. You know, there's a 350-page white paper. It's got incredible rich history of Europe in there, lots of it copied and pasted from Wikipedia for reasons that have yet to been revealed. We've got a 350-page levelling up bill, which actually's got virtually nothing on levelling up. It's a planning bill. And actually that's made what should be quite simple very complicated. What we want to see out of levelling up and what we would offer in government is about two things, not 350 pages worth of things, it's two things. It's money and it's power. And it's the transfer of money and power from the centre to communities. And, you know, at the moment, what we see with levelling up and money is that all the local authority areas that people live in have the chance to bid in for small bits of funding. And this fails for two reasons. Firstly, it creates a beauty parade where different councils, often neighbouring ones with similar challenges, don't talk to each other because they then share ideas in case the other authority wins and they lose it. What an odd way to do regional growth. We need to wrap that money up and target it at need and deprivation to give those communities time to plan and then crucially to spend it on their priorities, because that's the second problem with that, is that those bid funds, those bid pots are written to what ministers want. So it's not what you want for your community. You know, I see people from Sleaford, South Leicestershire, my East Midlands colleagues. It should be for you to say what you want the money to be spent on in your community, not ministers to say, okay, well, that's to do up your town centre. Well, that would be very good. You know, it'd be very good to invest that money in Lutterworth and its high streets. But actually, if that's not what local leaders want to spend it on, then it should be spent. If they want to spend it on the skills of their population, they should have the freedom, and we need to take that money and get it out to our communities to let them do that. But we can only do that if the powers go with it. And you know, it's great to, and I'll get there before Dan says, we share the same name, and it's not a common name, but we're not related, but we do share a lot of views as well. But I know that actually we need to get the powers out, you know, in Dan's case at a sub-regional level, to let mayors, combined authorities, council leaders shape place very much in the way that the previous discussion was talking about, because things will be slightly different for every community. I know that Dan's really, really well placed, for example, to deliver on net zero. And I believe that for all our mayoralties, I think that net zero, particularly the retrofitting agenda, would be much better delivered on their footprint than it will be in a big national programme. The same is true for skills, 16 to 19 skills. You really get huge value out of that by driving it locally, because, you know, again, in the spirit of the previous discussion, moving away from that blunt national intervention to really thoughtful local ones about, okay, where is your economy going in the future? What do you need? And then you should be able to shape and target the investment at that to get the best value out of it. And I believe to get the best impact more generally. And then the role of the nation state, the role of national government is to make sure you've got the big picture infrastructure that allows that to go, because there can't be, you know, levelling up in communities if national government's underfunded your council so you don't have basic services. You know, you can't have levelling up without proper social care. You can't have levelling up, you know, if you can't run bus services. If your national train service does not work, you can't have levelling up. You can't have levelling up if you don't have proper digital connectivity across all communities. That's particularly obviously pertinent for the communities that we're talking about today. That's what national government does. And then we get out the way of regional, sub-regional, local leaders to drive forward that economic growth and giving them the powers and the money in which to do so. And then we need, this is completely lost from the levelling up conversation, but is hugely significant for rural and coastal communities. We need a double devolution that says that actually we want communities to hold powers themselves, which is so great. We never see this in Labour Party meetings. This is brilliant. We should do this much more often. To have town and parish councillors on this panel as well, to say those are perfect levels for holding greater community power and for continuing that devolution down, because they really know their communities in the most intimate and localised way. You know, during the pandemic, though, you know, I've no doubt there's the colleagues on the call today and in general across towns and parishes that knew where people were who needed that help, who would be lonely, who would be isolated. And then we've kind of given up and gone back to national first again. What a shame that is. We can do much better there. And hopefully you'll have seen Lisa as Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up. You'll have seen her big ticket commitment that we've made around a community right to buy. So, and I know this is particularly pertinent for rural communities, when you're losing that loved asset, be it the village pub, be it the village hall, often for housing, to give you the first right of refusal and time and financial support to keep that asset as a community asset and to develop it as something that improves your community. And that's the sort of community power development that we need to see. So I'll finish there, Alex, because we'll have more chance during general conversation. But I did just want to make a final point of saying, we're at a particular point in the political cycle, and I hope colleagues are as enthusiastic about that as I am about where we are, about result on Thursday, about where things are looking nationally. But just to say that, to recognise for so many colleagues on this call, those I know and those I don't know, how much you've had to keep the lights on for the last longer than 12 years, for a lot longer period of that, sometimes in Labour groups of 1 and 2 on your local authority, at times feeling like, that you were the tidal wave was coming at you, and you've stood your ground, you've kept going, you've kept the Labour Party flame alive, and now we're in a position to build on that. And I wouldn't want, in all the good news, that not to be recognised. So we really appreciate that. And now we've got to come up with a compelling, exciting offer, take that to the country. Perhaps in 2 years, I would rather it was in 2 months, as I know everybody else would too, and then really change this country for the betterment of all our communities across our nations and regions. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That was really inspiring for us. We are now going to move on to our parish and town councillors. So I need to do a plug, first of all, for the Labour Coast and Country Town and Parish Councillor Network, a real opportunity for those town and parish councillors to get together, to share best practice, to talk about the challenges and the opportunities that we've got when we've got Labour people dotted around the countryside, quite often making real big decisions, Labour decisions for the benefit of their communities. So I'm sure that very shortly in the chat will pop up some ideas on how you can get involved, excuse me, in the Labour Coast and Country Town and Parish Councillor Network. So our next speaker is a parish councillor. It is Elizabeth Marsh. So over to Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for listening to me. I'm Liz Marsh. I represent Misterton and Walcote, which is a very small parish, which you possibly have driven through the very edge of because we skirt the edge of the M1. However, we look green and leafy, but we have got problems. But what I want to say is more generally about parish councillors. There's a good number of us who are Labour representatives. And one thing that was said to me by one of my parish members was, you are the only Labour representative who I've ever had representing me on any level of authority. We have a Tory MP, Tory district councillor, Tory county councillor, and that's very often the case in these areas. As a parish councillor, we have some powers, and our powers are they're not terribly well defined. There's lots of things we can do, and there are very few things that we have to do. What I have noticed locally is that the parish councils that have Labour members and Labour representatives are the ones who seem to be more proactive. Alex talked about stuff that happened during the pandemic. A lot of local councils would be going out and finding people who needed assistance and helping them. We do have, I've been a parish councillor probably for about 10 years. I haven't counted. I don't really want to. It's depressing when you look and see how long you've been something for. But in that time, what I have noticed is that we have been handed powers, but without the resources to support them. Because of the squeeze on district and county councils, some of their responsibilities they've tried very hard to palm off on us. Things like, it sounds very, very minor, but things like mowing, the mowing resources, and that's they even offered us the opportunity to fill in our potholes. We're a parish council of 5 members, none of whom has any engineering background, and I don't think we'd be very good at filling potholes in the road. We declined that offer, but we do have the power to make neighbourhood plans and things like that. So we have got some powers. And we've also, in the time that I've been there, we have bought our local pub. We registered it as an asset of a community asset, and we dealt with that as well. So what I want to say is that parish councillors are a willing, volunteer, completely unpaid group. There are a good number of Labour members amongst them. I think the Labour network that we're establishing is a great place to support us all. And that we are willing to do jobs, but we don't always have the skills to do some of the things that have been handed to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. So next up, it is a town councillor, and it's Pat Osborne, please.
Oh, hiya, thank you. Yeah, my name's Pat Osborne. I'm a town councillor in Blandford Forum, which is in North Dorset. I've been a town councillor representing my community here for well, since 2016. Lots of really interesting and exciting ideas really around levelling up coming from Alex, and some really interesting points from Liz around how the town councils can fit in with that. Is levelling up, do we need to address inequalities in our communities? Yeah, we do. There are inequalities in Blandford. Now, Blandford's a small town. It's got about 10,000 people that live within the boundary of the town council. There are pockets of inequality, and there are pockets of deprivation, and there are pockets of affluence as well, and they coexist next to each other. And that's the nature of small towns and rural communities, and it's always been the way, I guess, with the village, with the lord in his country manor, and then the person that's cleaning his riding boots. You know, those inequalities have always existed within small within rural communities. So one of the main problems with the levelling up agenda as it is that it doesn't take into account that the fact that those kind of inequalities live next side by side each other within our communities. There's a much older age profile across North Dorset, which is the wider constituency that I live in, and across Dorset, which is the local authority that I live with. And there's much more population sparsity. So getting to those little pockets of deprivation is really quite difficult. The infrastructure is I think it was, we heard before, the infrastructure in rural areas is often older and much more neglected, and so is in need of investment. We've got a really high cost of housing here. I mean, I know that's becoming a problem everywhere, but it's particularly acute in Dorset. Our police and ambulance services have real geographical challenges. All of these things need to be addressed through levelling up, or as Alex said, redistribution of wealth. There needs to be some level of redistribution to address those inequalities. Very recently, though, because of the way that the bidding for funding works, Dorset Council put in an application for some funding for Weymouth and Portland. Now, Weymouth and Portland's 45 minutes away from me, and it could be an hour and a quarter away from other people within the local authority area. I don't begrudge Weymouth and Portland getting investment. They desperately need it. They're one of the they're in the 10% of the most deprived communities and areas in the UK. So they desperately need that funding. But the application was turned down. It was failed. And Dorset Council's response to that is that we'll try to fill the form out better next time round. Now that's not a good position to be in for a number of reasons. One of the 10% most deprived areas in the UK failed to receive levelling up funding because the form wasn't filled out as well as somebody else's form. And secondly, it doesn't help the other pockets of deprivation across the wide rural geographical area in North Dorset. And that's a massive problem. The other real issue as well, around older people and the older age profile of the area in which I live, and it's not unlike a lot of rural areas. Dorset Council is facing a £3 million funding black hole for next time round. Sorry, not 3 million, 30 million. So I think most people would think that 3 million funding black hole would be enviable. It's a 30 million funding black hole. So the kind of services that it could affect, this could be adult social care that's affected. They've been able to protect that up until now, but the kind of crisis that they're up against in terms of funding at the moment is it now looks like it's going to be affecting almost statutory services. So do we need to address inequalities in our communities? Yes, we do. Does levelling up in its current guise with this bidding for pots of money address those needs and address that? No, it doesn't.
Okay. Thank you ever so much, Pat. We will now move on to our next speaker, former Member of Parliament and current County Councillor, and it's over to Ruth George, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm based in High Peak, which is the northwest tip of Derbyshire in the Peak District, but also on the edge of Manchester and on the edge of Sheffield in some parts, because it's a huge constituency. And yes, we desperately need levelling up, but not as the Tories are doing it. So we've actually got jobs. We're an old ex-industrial area, so we do have engineering firms. We've got a great science base, lots of hospitality for the Peak District. Even though farming itself is struggling and obviously quite insecure at the moment, there's lots of good job opportunities. What we don't have is we don't have transport, we don't have skills, we don't have housing, and therefore we don't have the people to work in the services that we need here. So for transport, I mean, we're ex-industrial. We've actually got 3 train lines in High Peak, 14 stations, which I'm sure many areas would be really envious of. But the services are very unreliable. A lot of them go to the edge of Manchester and don't come out into the Peak District, and they're unreliable when they do run. Buses, again, we do have a reasonably good bus service. A Labour council in Derbyshire for most of the last 2 decades has protected those bus services as much as possible and made them a real priority. But because the subsidy is reduced, then unless you've got a gold card and you're a pensionable age, then they're really expensive. I think it's £2.50 to go 1.5 miles down the road to my nearest town. So people don't use them, so therefore the costs go up. For active travel, we've had no investment in actual connectivity. It's lovely around here if you want to go for a walk in the hills. If you want to walk from one town to another to get to school or college or work, then you have to usually walk along a very busy main road with a narrow pavement in a valley, and it's not pleasant experience. For broadband, then that is getting better. To be fair, we've still got pockets where there are problems, but we've got quite an educated older generation who are really good at using the vouchers and getting those pockets sorted. But our 4G is really patchy. So we do have problems. No firm offers a decent service across the whole area, and that can be really problematic for things like mountain rescue at times. So what do we need? We need the decent transport and we need skills. We've got no FE colleges in High Peak offering the skills that employers are looking for in engineering and science. So firms can't get the apprentices that they need locally. Young people have to go to college outside of Derbyshire, in Greater Manchester, Sheffield, or Cheshire, and so they start that move away from their hometown and their home area into the cities. That is then exacerbated when they go to university, and it drives the brain drain. Housing, we are becoming a dormitory area for Greater Manchester in particular. House prices went up £50,000 in the year, or this is the lowest house prices in the year after lockdown, because people wanted to move out of the city into the countryside, which is fine, but the only houses that are being built are the larger 3-4 bedroom houses. The younger people whose skills we need and whose work we need around here in the lower paid jobs as well, particularly social care and health and things like bus drivers and all the practical jobs, they can't afford to live around here. So again, they're moving out, and there isn't the transport to enable people to cheaply come back and work here. So the answers are, it's got to be strategic. Yes, okay, give us devolution and we will plan, but we need the ability for differently devolved areas to work together so that we get the national infrastructure that we need, particularly on transport, and we need Labour city areas to have to work with Conservative areas that are more likely to be where our counties are. Even if we get a fantastic set of elections over the next couple of years, we need a solution that will work in the long term. So we need to be able to plan regionally. And somewhere like our area of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire are pushing for Devo at the moment. They're looking to possibly include Leicestershire in that, but without Leicester City. So it doesn't, devolution has to be done strategically again to make sense, and we need to make sure that there is not just a regional but a national plan that overarches those local powers to deliver locally.
Thank you ever so much, Ruth. Some familiar themes there of transport and broadband and skills that so often come up at Labour Coast and Country conferences. Quick reminder to you, this is your last chance to come up with some questions, because it will be over to you after our next speaker. So please do put them in the chat where Huel is monitoring them all and putting them all into some kind of good, helpful format for me, hopefully, during this session, so that I can then put them to our panellists. So our final speaker is the West of England Metro Mayor, Dan Norris. Over to Dan, please.
Thanks very much, Alex, and hello, everybody. First of all, can I tell you I'm Dan Norris, the Metro Mayor for the West of England. That covers Bristol, South Gloucestershire, Bath and North East Somerset areas, and some parts of North Somerset too. It's a population of over 1 million people. I invite you to come and spend your money. I've got to do my mayor job. Do come and see us over Christmas and help our traders. I invited Keir Starmer to do the same. You won't get chucked out of a pub like Keir did, I promise you, but please come and see us nonetheless. First of all, can I thank Huel for all he does, and Coast&Country, a fantastic organisation doing a great job. Huel, of course, was one of my terrific advisors when I was a minister in DEFRA under the last Labour government. So thank you for that, Huel. Can I also thank everyone who's listening in for what you do. We have made amazing strides since the 2019 election. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because people like you make a difference. So keep doing that, please. We mustn't get complacent in any way, but keep that work up. That's really important. Can I also thank Alex Mayer? If you want a job, Alex, you're terrific. Let me know. Okay, so do that. And Alex Norris, lovely to see you, Alex. My first priority as Metro Mayor is getting that Labour government, because that will make a huge difference. And I'm very much looking forward to you becoming a great minister in a fantastic government. And by the way, who is the dog? What's the name of your dog?
We've got, that's actually Corona, which has been a very difficult couple of years for a dog called Corona.
Okay. Well, that's good. Look, let's come to the question, because Alex will put me straight onto answering the question, which is quite right. Does so-called levelling up answer is the answer for towns and our towns and villages? And the straight answer is Levelling up is a concept. It has no meaning whatsoever. It should be called so-called levelling up, as I think Alex referred to in her opening comments. It is as relevant as back to basics under John Major. It is just a concept. It's just an idea. It means nothing. It's got a sort of geographical hint that it suggests it might help the north of the country, but actually it is meaningless. And the reason it's meaningless is because it doesn't drill down into need. It allows averages to cover things and hide genuine need. So, for example, my region, as I just described, is relatively prosperous in many respects. It contributes to GDP like London and the Southeast, unlike most of the rest of the country. Yet within it, it has, for example, amongst white working class young men, the lowest university entrance of anywhere in England. And similarly, there is the second shortest life expectancy in parts of South Gloucestershire for women. So that is hidden by the averages. So levelling up is a meaningless concept that doesn't actually make any difference. And it has all the disadvantages that Alex Norris, my namesake, mentioned. You know, this everybody competing, everybody doing loads of work for only some to succeed and get some money that they probably would have got given anyway, because the Tories are operating on a biased basis and giving it to predominantly Tory marginal constituencies in any event. So we mustn't fall for that. So what I would simply say to you is that what levelling up is really about is describing a problem and not giving any solutions to those problems. And actually, what I think very strongly is that what we need, I remember when I was the MP for part of my current constituency, a rural constituency, what I remember was that the Lord Ashcroft, the Tory peer who did polling, was he came and he asked a load of questions about why was Labour being so successful in the noughties? And what he concluded was that people understood that the Tories would make difficult decisions. What they realised was that Labour would make compassionate decisions. But when you combine the two, Labour was unbeatable. And that's the situation we've got to get back to again, where we are the natural party of government. And we do that by combining compassion and actually wealth creation, because you need to pay for things if you're going to be able to make a difference. So we, in my region, are very keen on net zero. We have a very radical electorate who are progressive, who are ahead of the rest of the country and certainly ahead of politicians when it comes to the environment. We have an ambitious net zero target of 2030. That means we will have to reduce CO2 emissions by 10% year on year from this point to 2030. We also put a huge store by public transport. We have done things that other Labour Metro mayors have done in reducing bus fares, for example, to lead the way. And what I think is really important for us to do is, as well as ask for devolution that is meaningful and not just gives money, but gives powers, because what I need more than anything is, oddly, not the resources, although I'd always want more. What I need is the power to be able to make the decisions that I know my communities need, rather than the Tories deny us the solutions that we need. So whether or not levelling up is an important concept ultimately is down to us, really. And what I think we have to do is redefine the argument, redefine the debate. We have to not be shy of using the word socialism occasionally, because actually it is an important concept. It is about a fairer society that meets need rather than economic profit. And we have to make sure that we recognise first and foremost, and perhaps above all else, is that actually all of us, whether we live in city or urban or rural or towns or the most remote hamlets, we actually all are pretty much the same. What we don't want to see is rough sleeping. What we don't want to see is old people in cold conditions dying of hypothermia. What we don't want to see is a whole range of things right across the country that we're all agreed on. So levelling up doesn't work, but what Labour has to do is fill that vacuum when we destroy that concept with something that is meaningful and better. And I would suggest strongly that that is a combination of recognising the importance of wealth creation and also compassion in a modern society. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Dan, for that. So now we're moving on to some questions. We have collated the ones that you've been putting into the chat, and I'm going to read them out, and then we're going to ask our panelists to respond to them. So the themes that we've been picking up in the chat, first of all, is what does successful devolution or levelling up look like for a Labour government, and how much of this is about who gets what money, or where the powers and the decision making sits. So that's the first theme we'd like our panelists to address. Secondly, there's a whole load of questions in the chat about transport. So what should our next Labour government do about transport in our more rural communities and our coastal communities? And then thirdly, basically, we think that Alex Norris understands those challenges facing rural communities and coastal communities, but how do we help make sure that other front bench teams understand them as well? So again, there's a whole series of questions in the chat about transport, about broadband, about housing, about skills. How do we make sure that the whole of the Labour Party front bench and our shadow ministers, and when they become actual government ministers, how do we make sure that they understand the challenges of the coast and countryside? So we will go back to our panel, and I'm going to muddle it up a bit. So we are going to start off with Ruth George to respond very briefly to those 3 points, or any of those points that you want to respond to, Ruth. Thanks. I've messed it all up, haven't I, by not doing it in the order you were expecting. No, there you are.
That's, no, I am here. Oops, and I was listening. I've even got a video somewhere. I mean, I absolutely accept that all rural areas are very different. We're very different from Lincolnshire, from the southwest, but we've all got the same challenges over transport, over skills, and over housing in particular. In some areas, we're lucky enough to have good jobs. Other areas aren't, but we need that basic infrastructure to come first. I accept we are relatively very lucky in terms of trains and public transport provision compared to many rural areas. But what we don't have, we have great connectivity into Manchester, we have great connectivity, or fairly good connectivity, into Sheffield over the other side. What we don't have is connectivity to the rest of Derbyshire. And when we're looking at a Devo deal that will be Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, where the power will be centred towards the south of Derbyshire with Derby, it's about 1.5 miles away by car. There's no train or bus service. Well, the trains, I think, take about 4 hours. You have to go via Manchester and Sheffield to get there, which is just crazy. So making everywhere, we need to make sure there's a strategy for that transport, and it does need to be interregional. There's a huge amount of funding that does need to go in particular to skills, but it will start paying off pretty soon, especially when we're looking at the sustainability agenda as well. If people can work locally instead of having to commute and use the transport, then it will reduce our carbon emissions. If we can get the sustainable jobs that we need in the rural areas instead of these long commutes, then it'll help our productivity, which is a key issue for all parties. And it will enable us to best use the talents of our young people who so often feel forgotten and neglected. And if they haven't got the means to move away, then we do have real problems with NEETs and with underutilised skills in rural areas. So it is a win-win situation, but it does need longer term perspective, certainly than the Tories have got. But we do need to be looking to plan over the next decade or two, rather than just the next election. But I think people have seen how the Tories have destroyed all our areas and our services, and if we can take people with us on that journey, then they'll give us the support we need to do that.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Ruth. So now over to Pat, please. About a minute, please, Pat.
I'm sorry, Alex. I think Pat has had to go and get some Lemsip.
Okay, no
Over
problem.
there,
In which
so-
case, we will move to Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues with transport in rural areas is that somebody needs to be prepared to subsidise it, because at the moment people don't use the buses because they're so unreliable. So people will only start to use them once they believe that they'll turn up on time, that they will actually get you there when you need to be there, that they will allow you to get back again. More importantly, our last bus, we do have a bus service. We're an unusual village. We do have a bus service, but our last bus arrives at 3:30 in the afternoon. It won't even bring the school kids back from school. What use is that for anybody who's working? It needs to be a long-term plan, and it needs money behind it, because unless you're prepared to subsidise them until they are seen as being a viable option, nobody will use them. Eventually, people are willing to use them. Lots of people want to use them. I would use a bus if it would actually work. It costs. I can walk to the next town, which is a very small town, Lutterworth, in about 40 minutes. It cost me £2.99 to go there on the bus. There we go. That's kind of all I really need to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you. So next, please, can we have Dan Norris?
Thanks, Alex. Well, my plea really is to Alex when there's the Labour government, which obviously we don't take for granted, but we're working hard to achieve, is that the Tories have been inept in two ways. They've not just not brought powers away from London, Westminster and Whitehall to the regions and to places where they can make the best decisions because they're closer to the challenges and understand them better, but they've also messed up what they do centrally. So, for example, buses have come up a couple of times. Now, for many years, at least 7 years, the bus industry and others have been complaining that there would be a shortage of bus drivers if we didn't do something about training on a realistic basis. So what did the Tory government do? Well, firstly, they ignored it for many years. And then last year, when we had no food on our shelves in supermarkets because heavy goods vehicle drivers were in shortage, they wrote to all bus drivers saying, why don't you become an HGV driver because you could earn a lot more, compounding the problem of a shortage of bus drivers. And that is the big challenge. Ironically, the real challenge, Elizabeth, at the moment is not resources if you have anything to do with buses, because there is just too few drivers to drive any buses. And you are so right to say that what people need are bus services that are reliable and predictable so they can plan their lives reliably around them. That is the key. But at the moment, we are having, through no fault of our own, I have actually more money than I can do anything with at the moment because there are so few bus drivers. There's a 400 driver shortage in my region alone. It would be easy if I could just get them from other parts of the country, but there's a shortage everywhere. So we are in a pickle because the government ignored these warnings for many years. And now I've got a situation where bus companies, because obviously they were sold off in the 80s, I'm old enough to remember that, bus companies are rationalising and cutting down on the bus services because they've got too few drivers, and so they need to make sure the ones they've got are reliable, otherwise they'll lose passengers in the long term. So that is a disaster. Also, the government, in terms of not dealing with things centrally, have done weird things when it comes to airports. So we've got airports competing against each other to increase the number of flights over and over above what the current figures are, even though those figures have not yet been met in terms of flight term. Rishi Sunak, for his infinite wisdom, decided to make it even cheaper for internal flights, one of the budgets of the many budgets I think there've been this year, rather than making sure that train fares were cheaper so that people use more sustainable forms of transport than aircraft. So there's all this crazy stuff. So the Tories are just weird in that they can't devolve and they can't make central decisions either. So what we've got to make sure is that we don't just describe the problems as I've done. What we've got to do is come up with good thought through solutions too. And it's going to be difficult because they've left us in a pickle financially. They've left this huge hole, which has been double the size of what it should be because of the disaster that has been Liz Truss and her cronies like Jacob Rees-Mogg, my predecessor, my successor as an MP in this area. What we have got to do is work really hard, as Alex Norris quite rightly pointed out, to have really good answers to these challenges. But they've also got to be pitched realistically. And that is a tough thing, because normally you can just say you'll do something different. You're not the same. and that gets you hopefully across the line to form a government. But my fear is that because resources will be so limited, we are going to have to set expectations where people understand that we aren't going to be able to throw money at things because that money won't be there. But what we are going to do is have sensible, reliable, and above all else, honest politics for the future.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. So it's now over to Alex to sum up for us, please.
Thanks, Alex. I was just briefly going to take on the first and last of those questions, if that's okay. Firstly, what success looks like for us in this space. And for me, it's where all nations and regions have that power and resource to shape their regional economy and all the things that contribute to that. So that's skills, local transport, digital connectivity. That will look different everywhere. You know, West Yorkshire will be looking at building their digital economy around Channel 4. In Nottinghamshire, we'll be looking around our great clean energy work we're doing. Hull, you know, using the Hull Lagoon at the port there. Something a bit different, but everywhere, creating that sense of growth and opportunity that means that all regions and nations are participating in our economy and contributing to Britain's success, and that those opportunities are there for people in those communities and they don't need to leave. There's a stage before that, though, about what success looks like going into the next election. And, you know, it gets to the point very much, the second question of that, but that we have policies that are relevant for people across the country. You know, Steve Bassam, I know, speaking at a later one, who's done incredible work on Labour's coastal policy, and I'm working with him on coming up with something muscular for the manifesto. And it's things like, you know, having a thoughtful coastal policy, things like dealing with and it's not fair to pick on Airbnb, but you know what I mean by that, the impact that short-term holiday lets are having on particularly beautiful rural communities where people now can't access housing exactly the way that Ruth talked about. So having thoughtful policies about how you don't unlearn the technology, but you make sure that it's sympathetic and fair, and that there's a balance in that, and that there's a contribution made to the local community. It's things like that's in Labour's manifesto. And I say this as a city MP, that our manifesto is something that's read across all communities as something that is relevant to all communities' lives, just in the spirit as Cllr said. And then that important question, how do we make sure that view is widely held and widely understood? And you're doing it today. If you look at, obviously, what I would say is a very, very strong array of panelists that you've got today, and the Zoom elements to this make life so much easier. We can meet in a way that we could not meet today otherwise. So now grow that outwards and invite, you know, my colleagues to, you know, it's so much easier now. I've done, even in the last 2 months, I've done, you know, meetings either in the Labour Party, the Co-op Party, or in my trade union, from the far southwest right up to English borders and lots of corners of Wales as well, and Northern Ireland. Invite us to come. And yes, to talk to you, you know, you're going to hear us talk, I'm afraid, with politicians, but to hear from you what your issues are, because that's the way that it seeps in and it permeates, and it'll become part of policy. So big events like today, really important. And then I would just take away, and whether it's Twitter DMing, whether it's emailing, saying to my colleagues, please come to our branch meeting, our co-op meeting, our trade union, our party co-op party council, because actually, you'll be amazed at how many yeses you'll get, especially now that we can do it digitally. Or if, you know, if they're perhaps constituencies part of your regional sub-region, invite them, because we all feel a duty to grow the movement, especially, you know, on our doorsteps. So, you know, that would be my plea and my suggestion there. And that certainly applies to me. Invite me, I will come.
Thank you ever so much, Alex. So I think we've learnt a lot in that last session, how we need policies, particularly buses that work reliably and well, and also some drivers to drive them. We've talked about green energy and retrofitting, how we need tourism policies that help rather than hinder local communities, how it's about resources and also about power. We've also learned that Dan Norris is very organised and already trimmed up for Christmas. Excellent tree, Dan. And also that you should never, ever let Alex Norris name your dog. So on that note, I will leave you as we go into the tea break. A slide should pop up on the screen now, and then please do be back in time for the start of the next session. thank you all ever so much, and a particular thank you to our panelists.